switch it on. All right, perfect.
Pairing mode.
Make sure your audio is switched off unless you're talking, because we're getting some feedback. Okay, perfect. If someone is still having the audio on, please make sure you have your audio switched off. We're having major feedback. Can you mute that account?
No, we can't. Stephen, can you mute? I think it's your thing that's cooking feedback.
Okay, I think it's
okay. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So
okay, I believe that we had a list of like which groups were up, and I think Lynn and South Africa were up first. You're all in like some sort of fancy boardroom. That looks like the most luxurious and the most social setting that I've seen. How are you guys all doing? And what
would be expected?
What's going on? Yeah, you guys look luxurious.
If you could just give us 2 seconds to just get everybody here.
Yeah, no worries.
Then, yeah.
So how many people do you have there? In where are you? Tell us like just where you are.
We're in Port Elizabeth, otherwise named as Quebec, and we're on the beachfront here in what's called the Beach Hotel, in the small boardroom of the Beach Hotel. And to give you the introductions, let me just, I may as well just launch into this now. If everybody is here, I'll be happy to go for it. Vince is here. Yeah, and Vince and Manu. I'm going to just introduce the room, and then you guys can introduce yourselves as independent collaborators with that. Let me just share. There's one go into slide here because sliding. So present in the room is myself and Lynn Crick from Nelson Mandela University, which is here in Port Elizabeth, just 10 minutes around the corner from where we're currently presenting from. And my senior research assistant and technician, Erin Hilmer, is present. You can wave to the people on the other side. Then I also have Gemma Finch, Dr. Gemma Finch from University of KwaZulu-Natal, who's traveled here from Pietermaritzburg. And then we have Dr. Nadia Duplessis, who is a postdoctoral researcher of mine at the moment in my lab. Wave, good. And then we have some of my students here who are brand new to paleoecology research. Some of them are in 3rd year, some of them, one is in honors, and they hopefully will be continuing to work with me from next year onwards. And they've all been doing small paleo-themed projects. And we have Luke, we have Asi, we have Tumi, and we have Mvana. And so what we did this morning was just thrash out some ideas and looked at things from a Southern African perspective. And also just to note that we have our archaeological contingent who are all in America. I don't know who are here currently, but they will feed into our sort of initial ideas when we get a chance to discuss things with them. And then we also have Manu, which he can introduce himself.
Oh, finding the unmute button. Manu Chevalier. So I'm currently as a postdoc in Bonn, and I've joined the Southern African Hub. As you know, I've worked with these guys during my PhD and ever since. So I've naturally belonged there, but I'm also interested in working in all of Africa. because part of my job has been to develop that CREST method that we'll mention in the introduction video. So I'm really like on the data modeling part of the thing. So, and that's how I would like to contribute to this project, basically just continuing my work, modeling data and trying to extract always better climate information from these proxy records. And that's about it.
Thank you, Manu. And then we also have Vincent Hare from UCT, University of Cape Town. He was meant to be present here with us in Port Elizabeth, but unfortunately he's a little bit sick. So he did participate in this morning's group and is currently present, but virtually. So if he would like to introduce himself a little bit more.
Hi, thanks very much, Lynn. I'm here by invitation from Lynn. My name's Vincent Hare. I do isotope geochemistry. I'm based in the Stable Isotope Laboratory at UCT. Often that's archaeologically focused. Sometimes and often as well, it's paleoenvironmentally focused.
Thank you, Vince. And not present, unfortunately, he couldn't make this meeting, is Brian Chase, who's expert in Southern African paleoclimates and stable isotope records. And Mike Meadows, also from University of Cape Town, but from the Environmental Science Department, one of my mentors, might be able to join us this afternoon for the informal session. He's currently, he's the president of the IGU, and so he's part of the International Science Council big meeting this week. So there was a clash in that instance, but he might be able to pop online later today, so we can hear from him then. And is that everybody? What is it? Yeah. Have you missed anybody? Good. Yeah. Then what we sort of looked at in terms of how our contributions can feed into the greater scheme is to break it down into our sort of primary contribution or potential contribution would be from the vegetation side. So looking at using pollen-based climate reconstructions, but first to get the vegetation through the pollen records, and then to bring that together and compare and contrast independent paleoclimate records from that second blue box over there. And this is all from looking at Southern African contribution to the overall, and to feed into and not to work in isolation. So oopsie. So the green pie, we're hoping to be able to really nail down in terms of leveraging what we've already created and started working on, which is the African pollen database, Neoterma work, and both Gemma and I are data stewards for that, and we're hoping to co-opt Erin into doing some Neoterma uploads for us as well, and to kind of really robustly evaluate what records are useful for this kind of synthesis in terms of putting together selection criteria, grappling with the temporal and spatial coverages, and really making sure that the chronological control is there to answer the questions that we're looking at. And then using CREST in a sort of double-headed arrow in terms of selecting appropriate pollen taxa within these records that are bioclimatically significant, can tell us something in terms of the climate. And then to bring that all together and produce a climate-based reconstruction using the pollen records. And then either to work on that sort of as a Southern African vegetation synthesis and then crestify it, or to look at the Africa-wide level and bring in the data stewards from East Africa like Rahab and Sarah leading it from the North American side, but also from the other parts of Africa, and to sort of connect those together and see what patterns we can pull out. Is there anything else that I've missed on that contribution? No. Covered. And then to work on the paleoclimate angle, we noticed that in terms of Stephanie et al.'s paper, there's quite a gap on the Southern African side. And I think we can definitely work on bringing in, we know of many records that can feed into that and address some of those, the Southern African angle. And we'd be happy to put together sort of a thorough analysis and compilation of key Southern African records. What is in existence? What is the state of the art at the moment? what is applicable for the sort of PNAS level type of analysis, and including both marine. We have to look at the marine because we don't have that many very long records from the terrestrial side. And then to really, before putting those forward for further analysis, to evaluate the kind of representativity of these individual records and how valid they can be used. And then because of the sort of the chronological limitations in terms of the limited temporal range of many of these records, we propose that we maybe look at just a much shorter time slice. So focus on the last glacial interglacial transition and region, and see whether, sort of synthesizing all these things, if we can see a similar pattern in terms of Paleo-Enzo, is it valid for, number one, this time scale? And number two, is Southern Africa actually, are we seeing this kind of pattern coming out of that region or not? Or what are the other mechanisms that could be driving climate change within that sub-region of Africa? And then the elements that none of us in this room are like super highly expert on is the archaeology, but we want to be able to then look at that within that shorter time frame where we have more archaeological records as well, and more, especially within Southern Africa, to be able to feed the archaeology into that. Anything else from any of us before I move on? And then just some sort of slightly more isolated ideas that we came up with this morning in terms of other proxy evidence and how they can be important contributions, potentially more of an ad hoc way, in terms of looking at paleofire, the charcoal records, and other types of paleoecological information, such as plant macrofossils. There's important sites within South Africa that are not pollen-based, but actually macrofossil-based and macrocharcoal. And also to bring into the high resolution stable carbon and nitrogen isotope records from Hyrax rhythms, specifically within Southern Africa, will really give a nice paleoclimate independent record compared to the vegetation. And there's also some long and synthesized speleothem records that have just recently been published by Brian Chase, covering the last 100,000 odd years, which are very important as well to include. And in terms of outputs, I will independently look at the seminar series and ideas for that, but they pretty much follow on from our contributions ideas in terms of the vegetation synthesis, and then something maybe specifically crest related, as well as maybe looking at the past 100,000 paleoclimates. So using those speleothem stable isotope records for slightly longer periods than the pollen that we have, look at that specifically, and then bring it together in a more sort of synthetic way, looking at the model, climate model reconstruction into comparison. And this is obviously like on the broad scale, not just looking at Southern Africa. We want to be able to like produce those and then feed them into your guys' full on African wide level. So for seminars, we are thinking of an overview talk to outline what I mentioned in terms of the paleoclimate records, what is available, what we have, what's the state of the art, where are the gaps, what still needs to be worked on, sort of a very general idea and synthesis talk. And then a more specific seminar looking at CREST and its examples in terms of applications to South African records, and potentially even then going a little bit further and doing a training course for this. And this is all Manu. Manu, if you want to mention anything else on this point.
Nothing more than that. Yeah, I was just suggesting that, yeah, I could give a talk to introduce the method and some of the applications that we did in Southern Africa. And I was just thinking, like, you know, more like maybe longer term, but if that's a method that we want to use in this project, I on my own obviously cannot reconstruct all the analyze all the records from Africa. So I could train a few of you guys who might be interested, and we could just expand and produce these reconstructions much more rapidly if more people interested in using it. So just a suggestion.
Great. Yeah, no, I mean, I would personally be very interested to be trained up in that. So I'm all for that. And then the last point in terms of the seminar series, which I'm hoping Justin can speak more directly to, is an idea to look at a sort of worm path. So one single archaeological site that we are working on, many of us within this project are also collaborating with Justin Parato, who's putting in a big NSF grant currently to relook at the archaeological cave site of Wormpas in the Southern Cape of South Africa. And that feeds into, that's a very much multidisciplinary, multi-proxy work that's happening, and will continue to, will start up now and happen next year and the following year. So I can't really speak about that right now. And I think that basically summarizes our main points from this morning. I don't know if Vincent and Manu and anyone else in this room have anything else to contribute to that, but I think we can leave that as a sort of open-ended start.
No, that's great. Does anyone else want to jump in on that? Does anyone have any questions for Lynn and the Southern African team?
We want to go the reports one by one first, and then do the general discussion as in the outline, or discuss them individually.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of time if we to ask any specific questions. Otherwise, we should move on. I mean, I think it's great there. I mean, to see three ideas for three contributions. I think there is a question there about how do we roll Crest out. I mean, Manu is pretty superhuman, but like probably synthesizing and converting all the data from across an entire continent might even stretch him. So I think the idea of a training event to get people together, a workshop, would be really, really nice. So I think that's a positive. So yeah,
just maybe like a quick note on that. Sorry to interrupt you, Will. Just for those who have tried to use Crest in the past, and there was like always problems to getting the right data, installing the software to make it work on different laptops. I know some of you had troubles. Now it's all available as an R package, so that should be working on every machine. So, and I have a calibration data set for Africa that comes with it. So it's just a matter of running a few functions and to make it work. It does. I hopefully have removed all the, computer technical problems that were quite recurrent in the past. So hopefully there's that.
Exciting development. Thanks, man.
No, that's great to hear, and I think it'll be particularly with all the efforts to get new pollen data sets into Neotoma that are going on. I think there's a really nice opportunity to take those data sets and do some really fun and novel mapping of those climate regimes or climate reconstructions. So I think that fits really beautifully. Is there anything else that anybody else wants to raise at this time? Either like stick your virtual hand up, or that's Manu sent us his link, so you can go and get cresting right now. No, listen to the other talks first, and then
Cresting live.
Then crest away. In which case, I suggest we move on to, I think the East Africa hub was next. So Rahab, are you ready to introduce what's been going on in your Eastern Africa thing this morning? Rahab's just walked away. She's in a room with people as well. She's got a very nice room. Look at that. That's great. We can't hear you yet, but we can see you all.
There's no audio.
Unmute.
There we go.
Okay, can
Yes.
you hear me now? Okay. So it's good. It's afternoon for us.
Yep.
Just a second. Yeah.
Cierra.
Okay, great. Yeah, we can see the PowerPoint.
Okay.
We can see it in presented view though, which is fine. But
So it is afternoon for us, so we greet you good afternoon. And this morning with my colleagues, I'll first introduce the members that we have here physically, and those who have joined us online. So our participants from East Africa are Dr. Emmanuel Diema, who is an expert in archaeology, and she's worked extensively with a lot of work in the region, in East Africa region. And then we have Dr. Stephen Rushina. Just a second. Okay, guys, sorry for that. I was saying we have Dr. Stephen Rushina, who is a paleoecologist. He has worked for many years in paleoecology, paleoecological work and research in East African region. And most of the people who have worked in Poland, palynology and paleoecology, they've worked with Dr. Rushina here in the country and also outside. We have Dr. Christine Ogola. She's a zooarchaeologist, specialist in the faunal remains in most of the archaeological sites. We have Dr. Christine Omwombo. She's from University of Nairobi, and she's she's going to play a key role in bringing up the data on modern climate and how we can possibly model what we have in the paleoclimate to the modern climates and future climate scenarios, working with Professor Dan Olago at the University of Nairobi. We have Professor Asfa Awasen from University of Addis Ababa and University of Botswana. Currently, he's a key expertise in East African region on paleoclimates and paleoenvironment. So he's going to bring a lot in terms of paleoclimates. We have Dr. Veronica Moirori. She's a paleoecologist, who has worked, she's working with the long-haul drilling in East African region. We have several students who are working with us. Ms. Mariam Budala from University of Calgary, she's Tanzanian. We have Ms. Husna Mashaka, she's from Tanzania. She's a master's student at Nairobi University. We have Sylvia Wemanya, an archaeologist, also a student. We have Baru, who is a student in paleoclimates working with Professor Asfa. And we have Dr. Pastor Bushozi, who is joining us online from Tanzania. He was not able to join us physically. We have Bleju from Uganda and a student also from Uganda, Christopher Esbugo. And then we have Robert Machat, Professor Robert Machat from York University. He's worked extensively also in ecological research in East African region, especially in Tanzania and in Kenya. So our morning, I'll bring you to our morning output. Can someone for me the slide? This morning we had at least three presenters. We had Dr. Rushina, Dr. Veronica, and Emmanuel and Ogola. And how we bring our output, we first formatted to know what sites we are talking about, then what time scales are we have the data sets and what proxies we have, and then what are the highlights from this presentation. So this morning, Dr. Mshina presented some work from Southwest Ethiopia in a small lake, Donera Lake. And this is a late Holocene site that goes back to 3.4 thousand years before present, where they studied pollen to look at the changes in vegetation and what is the cause of these changes. And the results showed that the changes in the vegetation, which changed from forested regime to open grasslands to croplands, it's because of the human activities, a lot of farming on those landscapes. And then from their data set, they were able even to highlight and to show some landslides on the landscape, because they have reversal dates on the sequence. Then Dr. Veronica Muiruri presented some work from Southern Rift system, Kenya, from a Lonko, from Magadi and Kora basins, which span up to all the way to 1 million years. And the proxies they looked at were diatoms, pollen, faunal record, and archaeological record, and looking at how environments changed in the past and what were the main drivers, which is climate, tectonic processes, hydrogeology, among other things. And then the highlights were mainly the changing in the environment by looking at the changes in the lake water levels, where we have some time specified, as you see on the slide, around 1 million to 0.7 wetter conditions, in signifying increased precipitation, which changed to drier conditions all along. And then after 500,000 years, the climatic variability increased. And this is connecting very well with the archaeological record on the innovation, the technological innovations, where they shift from Acheulean stone tools in the archaeological record to Middle Stone Age toolkit. So that's a site, and we have similar sites also that are looking at that kind of transition. And then next, Dr. Diema also, as I said, he studied archaeology broadly in East Africa, and his time scale mainly early Stone Age, Middle Stone Age to later Stone Age, and mostly the proxies that are used here are stone tools, rock art, faunal remains, and GIS data. So the highlights are cultural responses to the climatic changes. These are seen in this site, and technological innovations, high mobility coinciding with the dry periods, and also social exchanges and interactions happening while during high mobility season. The gaps that were seen from the record in archaeology, we lack a well-stratified sites within MSA and their transitions. So this is something, a gap that exists that we can look through, because the sites are there and the people are there, researchers are there. Dr. Ogola presented on fauna assemblage, broadly also from East Africa, and her work goes back to 3.3 million, coming through early Stone Age, Middle Stone Age, all the way to Iron Age, when there was very intensive crop farming, where clearing of forest was not only left to the fire system, but also the use of iron to clear forests and to clear bushes. And with the faunal remains, the proxies they've been using are Asian DNA and stable isotopes. And one of the highlights from this, especially the new tool they're using, the DNA, is that use DRIs people who are of the same community. They have identified the past who are same people, but they align to different cultural activities or cultural orientations. And the big question is why same people would have a different cultural alienation. And the bigger picture from the discussion this morning, it's related to the external factors and which will be mostly the environment and the habitats that people are living in. So the highlights were subsistence acquisition, especially she has a very important site in Western Kenya, where there is evidence of multiple subsistence strategies, where people are having fishing, they are crop farming, they're keeping livestock, all this within one site. And that was a good thing to think about, how people can go to the extent of adapting to the environment to be able to survive. And next slide. That's all we have for this morning. And we are hoping tomorrow we'll have the paleoclimate presentations tomorrow morning, so that we can bring now all the data sets into perspective. So we expect tomorrow to bring all our output together and identify the gaps in totality and present back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rahab. That's great. There's clearly a lot of stuff going on there. And I guess in terms of generating seminars to put into the series, any or all of those presentations that you guys put together this morning are potentially a focus for that, right?
Yes, correct.
I mean,
we thought after tomorrow now, thinking about the bigger picture of synthesizing all these data sets, vegetation data set, archaeological data sets, all these outputs will come out clearly now tomorrow when we have everybody on board as presented, because we still have Dr. Bushozi to present something from Tanzania, and we can now incorporate all that because the East African region is generally big in terms of expertise. So we have to bring all the ideas from all the people so that we can come with all the conclusions by tomorrow.
Yeah. One of the questions that just came to me, or thoughts that came to me from your presentations, was related to, you mentioned that you had someone working or looking at ancient DNA. I just wondered if you could say a bit more about what settings that ancient DNA is being successful in, and how that might work. It was because we were speculating on this earlier this morning in our little meeting, and if you've got people who are actually doing this successfully or working on it, it would be good to maybe add a little bit more onto that. Would be quite helpful.
Yes, Christine is keeping is hearing that, and they'll keep in touch.
Yeah. Cool. But do you know what sort of sites the ancient DNA is being able to be extracted from? Like what sort of sediments? Do you know that, or?
These ones are coming from the fauna, from the bones themselves.
Okay.
From humans, yeah. These are ancient DNA from humans.
Ancient DNA from human bones, human bones.
From human bones, yes, that have been excavated from the archaeological sites. And mostly are Holocene sites. Okay.
That's super interesting.
Okay.
Any other questions or thoughts from anyone in the virtual or real rooms that we have? I'm just writing down notes. Sure. Okay, so I suggest we keep moving onwards then. Like if there's nothing like jumping in right there. So thank you very much. That was really cool. Sounds like you've had some really good discussions. There seemed to be a huge amount of names that you went through at the beginning. And how many people do you actually have physically together there? It was really great.
We are 9.
9, super. Yeah, 9 people. Yeah, and it must be, yeah, that's great. And more online. Fabulous. So I'm going to switch over to Sarah now, who is still awake and still with us, and to give us, because I believe that the American hub met up a few days ago or a little while ago. Is that right, Sarah? Sarah, tell us what's going on.
Yeah, sure. So we met Tuesday, so 2 days ago, for a little over an hour, and then exchanged some more communications by email. So we probably haven't had quite as much immediate interaction as some of the other hubs that we've heard from so far, but I'll share the notes that I put together from our discussion, which was a really nice one. We also, because we're kind of distributed spatially, geographically within our hub, there are some of our hub members who had a variety of conflicts and that it's quite early for, so they're gonna pop in on the meeting when they can. If someone is not here, that's not a sign that they're not interested in the project. Everybody expressed great interest in being involved in the project. And I see that we have, Brian is here from our hub, and I think the rest are going to join later. But I will kind of introduce everybody by name, and then Brian, I'll let you introduce yourself, and then I'll introduce the others on their behalf. So for the North American hub, we're these 6 people. So Jim Russell, Brian Stewart, Tyler Faith, Melissa Burke, Justin Pargeter, and then myself. And so I put some details about each of us on this slide to sort of give you a sense of where we, fit into like the ternary diagram of all of the different factors of interest here. Brian, do you want to introduce yourself directly?
Yep, can do. I'm just trying to be quiet because we've got kids still sleeping in the next room.
Understandable.
So I'm Brian Stewart. I'm assistant professor in archaeology, curator of African archaeology at the University of Michigan. I work in Southern Africa, in highland landscapes and up in the Lesotho Highlands, and then in arid dryland landscapes in the Namaqualand desert along the west coast. And I'm interested in population demography, population dynamics, evolution of plasticity in late Homo. I work with stone tools and a variety of other material culture, and I'm getting now more into radiogenic isotopes for proveniencing raw material to look at social networking across space and through time.
Okay, thanks. So then, in addition to Brian, we also have Justin Pargeter, who's at NYU, who's also an archaeologist who's working in Southern Africa, whose time period of interest, as I have marked on there, is also sort of generally more late Quaternary. And then also Tyler Faith, who's at the University of Utah, who's a paleoecologist interested in paleoenvironments, in particular mammal fauna, working in Southern Africa as well as Eastern Africa with kind of I put parentheses around late Quaternary, generally late Quaternary with a little bit older period of interest. Outside of that, we also have 2 organic geochemists within our hub, Melissa Burke, who is at Notre Dame. And so she's interested in, paleoclimate dynamics as well as paleoecology, working mostly in East Africa, but also on a variety of Marine Corps records from around the margin. So I put East Africa plus all, with a time period of interest that's, sort of Quaternary in general. Jim Russell, who is at Brown, sort of similar disciplinary interests, paleoclimate dynamics. He also works in the Indo-Pacific. So there's sort of like interesting sort of dipole questions that I think he thinks a lot about. As well as paleoecology, working mostly in East Africa, but also sort of more broadly, and also with kind of a generally Quaternary, late Quaternary focus. And then myself, I'm an assistant professor at Penn State. My interest is mostly in paleoecology, and particularly from the perspective of the plants. My region of interest is mainly East Africa and Arabia, and my time periods of interest are maybe the most recent, late Quaternary and Holocene is sort of generally what I put on there. So that gives you a sense of who we are and what we do, and some of the convergence of our interests and our work. And then this is just kind of a synthesis of some of our discussion that we had a couple of days ago. We spent a lot of time talking about some muddy points that we thought would be, good things to talk a lot about, like good fodder for discussion later in this session, and then in the next session. In particular, one of the things that we talked a lot about was the state of the data. That we have these, 3 data streams, as well as the paleoecological data, paleoclimate data, and archaeological data, as well as climate model output. That because we all come from slightly different disciplines, we may have a better or worse sense of what the state of each of these data streams might be. So we're using some of the time for discussion to get everybody on the same page about what the geographic and the temporal scales of the data are would really help being able to highlight low-hanging fruit for questions of interest. We did brainstorm a little bit about what that state of the data was, which we would be really excited to get more information about. So the paleoecological data, at least from the pollen side, obviously there's a lot of other paleoecological data, is going into databases right now, both the African pollen database as well as Neotoma. There are about 100 sites already on Neotoma, not all of which have age models of the type that you would probably want to use for an analysis like this, but there are 100 on there and more going up. And they can work because it's on Neotoma. A lot of these data sets can be easily imported into R and can work with a variety of new packages that can filter quality control data and make new standardized age models. So that's sort of a nice place to be at. There are time constraints on this data. It's better near modern. The further you go back, the worse it gets. And there's probably particularly steep drop off after the LGM. The spatial constraints for the pollen data are that it is densest in East African montane regions and also in South Africa. So from the paleoclimate data perspective, we were mostly talking about this in terms of organic geochemical reconstructions. Most of those records are not in databases officially, but there are published syntheses that are available. When Melissa and Jim join, they can probably talk some more about this, but it didn't sound like availability of that data would be particularly difficult. It might be the standardization part that would be a little bit more challenging. The time constraints for the paleoclimate data would be really similar to the paleoecological data, better near modern, worse as you go back in time. So from the perspective of the archaeological data, this is where if I know Brian has kids in the background, so if you don't want to jump in, that's fine. But if you do, definitely feel free. What that data is usually artifacts, rocks, and radiocarbon dates as you get closer to modern. And this was what we thought was probably the part, the data stream that needs the most assessment currently. That the project participants themselves have a good sense of what the regional availability of data might be within their regional foci, but outside of those regions, it would be a little bit thornier. So the larger in scale you go, the more complex the problem gets. Such that a big synthesis might be outside of the scale of the project, but that's definitely a subject for discussion. In the time constraints for the archaeological data were a little bit different because they were much more variable by region, such that North Africa and South Africa were probably denser in more recent periods, but then in East Africa, you actually have a higher data density in mid-Quaternary and older. And then from the paleoclimate model simulation perspective, we said that probably still needed assessment to know what was already available. And hopefully there's someone on this meeting, there's probably someone on this meeting that knows that. So we just left that open because we didn't have that expertise. In general, we said that we thought that some of the limitations were that all of these data types were quite patchy, probably in different ways. Lynn spoke to this as well, that to some extent is going to factor into thinking a little bit strategically about what the best time periods and geographic regions might be for case studies. So given this, we said, do the research foci themselves, research questions follow an assessment of available data? We thought that it would be helpful to know a little bit more about that and in order to know what's possible. And that at least from our hub perspective, but some of the other members of my hub had gone back and looked at the participant list and thought a little bit about, some of the time periods and regions of expertise that a lot of our expertise and data seemed to skew sort of modern, which felt like it really impacted the questions that we could start to ask. And because the data seemed to skew modern, in particular as regards the archaeological data, that sort of belies that maybe focusing on more human behavioral ecology questions or like niche construction questions rather than macroevolutionary questions might make some sense, but that not that that would preclude us from also like asking macroevolutionary questions if there are like, you know, research groups within the project that had a sense of how to do that. Other general thoughts that we had, regional case studies might make the most sense due to some of the data constraints. Different time periods can be better tested in certain areas. So I said that in the late Quaternary, where your questions would be more impacts of human behavioral ecology on the landscape, most of the archaeological data is in South Africa, North Africa. That actually works out pretty well with regards to the other data streams. There's a lot of paleoecological data, like Lynn said, in Southern Africa, and paleoclimate data as well. For earlier macroevolutionary questions, most of that data is in East Africa. Many of them have you know, concomitant regional or like within the same core paleoecological data sets or paleoclimatological data sets. So I think, you know, it just sort of seemed like based on the focus of the questions that you might want to focus on different regions. There was also some interest in particular by some of the members of the group in sort of starting with a theory-driven project where like the archaeological data or theories around behavioral ecology would lead and then allow us to develop hypotheses that then we could sort of develop a strategic test for with data that we know is really good and that could answer those questions. That the paleoecological folks and the paleoclimatological folks like myself might be less familiar with this literature. I definitely felt that was the case for myself anyway. And so I'll talk in a second about the outputs that we proposed, but you know, we thought that, you know, one of the ways that some of these seminars could be really informative and also help drive along the project would be getting everybody on the same page who come from like very different disciplines. And so Tyler and then also Brian, Justin, and Tyler have some seminars that they propose to lead to talk about some of that literature. It was also suggested that, you know, one potentially really fruitful, interesting way of organizing people within groups across disciplines might be the collaboration of, you know, sort of people working cross-continent, but within really similar biomes, that people working within regions of ecological significance, say like interested in forest savanna boundaries, regardless of whether you're working in Western Africa, Eastern Africa, Southern Africa, that there are sort of testable questions that can come out of working in those environments, regardless of like where on the continent you're working, that could have patterns that emerge that would be like really interesting. So that was where our discussion went, which was really fun. In terms of outputs, we focused mostly on seminars, and like I said, I think each kind of, we have paleoecological expertise, paleoclimatological expertise, and archaeological expertise, and sort of each little groups within our hub thought that they would want to propose a seminar that could sort of to some extent present data, state of the data, state of the, you know, I guess like the state of the art of thinking about how to combine data in a way that would be not just like useful and interesting to the broader scientific community, but that would, like I said, help drive the project goals forward. So Tyler actually just published a really interesting paper that I think could also be a good framework, or at least like good background for us. It's a Faith et al. 2021, and it's in Tree, and the title of it is Rethinking Ecological Drivers of Hominin Evolution. That he would be interested in presenting a seminar potentially on that paper, which thinks about like how you answer these questions given an incomplete fossil record, data sets with, you know, really different spatial and temporal scales, and then integrating those data into like theoretical framework in order to build inferences that are more causally derived instead of derived from patterns. So that could be an interesting seminar. Brian, Justin, and Tyler proposed a seminar about testing the links between theory and technological evolution. That one, I wrote a note for them to look back on it to make sure that I properly distilled what that would be about. But they had a really great idea for a seminar about that. Melissa and Jim said that they would be willing to give a seminar sort of synthesizing African paleoclimate data, which I thought would be really great and useful. And I would be willing to give a seminar about the state of the African pollen database, data standards, and ongoing data mobilization, if that was useful. In terms of papers, we didn't really talk about a lot of papers. It's still kind of under discussion, but via email, there was some talk about a synthetic paper involving maybe an assessment of regional archaeological data. That's still maybe to be developed for later in the workshop. The last thing that I added just this morning when I was thinking about it was that there's a lot of touch points between this project and other ongoing things, that there might be people or resources that we could leverage that would be really useful. I guess, again, thinking about this project from like a, using low-hanging fruit, taking advantage of low-hanging fruit perspective. Pages has a bunch of working groups that have a lot of overlap with what we're trying to do. Land Cover 6K, which also has a, sort of mapping agenda, and Human Traces, amongst others. Those were just two. Again, there's modelers on this workshop, and so I don't, they know much better than I do. But the PMIP4 website I scanned really quickly today because I hadn't looked at it in a while. The Paleo Climate Model Intercomparison Project from the most recent IPCC, that, those are simulations, transient and equilibrium simulations that are available that might be useful. I'm involved in a project through Belmont Forum that is, to some extent, working on paleoecological data mobilization, that there's crossover with that project. And then the HOPE project out of the University of Norway, or out of Bergen, has a bunch of outputs that are sort of interested in thinking about paleoclimate and human impacts on vegetation. So it's kind of, in some ways, like the reverse of this question, but they are developing R packages that can use Neotoma data and then perform like multivariate rate of change analyses and other like multivariate analyses on individual records or like aggregated regional data sets that might be useful tools for us as well. So that's kind of, those were the outputs of our conversation. And then, I'm not sure if anyone has follow up on that, or if there are other hub members that want to chime in. That's kind of what I have.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Does anyone want to add to what Sarah has said?
I'd just say that's a great summary, Sarah. I'm impressed that you distilled so much of what we talked about. Well done. You must have taken notes, unlike the rest of us.
I did. It was a good conversation. I learned a lot.
It was a great conversation. Yeah, I just to speak to some of the issues of scale very quickly. I mean, on the archaeology side, and I'm sure all the archaeologists on the conversation, I hopefully would agree. The data are so patchy, by region, that once you scale up, you really do have a tough time trying to make it, marry into paleoecological records, which are, obviously patchy themselves in time and space, but I think better distributed than the archaeological records. So you've got that problem. And then you've got a problem of technological convergence as well, where, there's only so many ways to skin a cat, or to nap a core. And you start to get sort of redundant similarities in stone tool technologies across space that don't necessarily mean that they have, social or cultural connections. So these are just issues of scale that can be resolved if you just scale down and sort of intelligently parcel out geographies and like Sarah was saying, I think comparing biomes, adaptations within biomes, and through sort of reasonably well-tested theory and a prism like risk reduction, and using things like behavioral ecology, which we know has some some formality to it. I think you can sort of reduce the entropy a bit and get into interesting behavioral questions, and then create testable links with which we can approach the ecological data that the other team members are going to be putting together for some really productive results. But I think, yeah, so I think time, time and spatial scale are going to be key. And I think the late Quaternary for us is going to be much more fruitful. I'm not saying nothing can be done in the older time periods, but I think it'll just be vastly more productive to think about doing more work in that time space. So that's all I would say.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brian. Yeah, I agree. And I thought that resonated with some of what Lynn was saying too during her report as well, that look more last interglacial to present or LGM to present type of analysis might make more sense, especially from a regional perspective with some of the data.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And I think the thing to have within this, we're kind of expected to do stuff that is both Pan-African, but I think actually layering that up and having regional synthesis and regional collections of data or climates or archaeological data, where it makes sense, is really the building blocks that we can use to get to that overall view. Like leaping straight into a continental scale is, yeah, probably not really possible in a very straightforward way, but getting into the details and drilling down into these regional syntheses, I think is really a great way. I mean, it was super to see that range of the 4 talks there. I think this real sort of setting the scene of what's going on, and the sort of driving things by this sort of ecological theory is very much in line with what we'll talk about in a moment for what we were thinking about this morning. Slightly different questions, but I think if we can set up some of those frameworks and use those human theories that we can test against the vegetation data and test against the paleoclimate data and models, then I think that'll set us on a very good track to answering some questions. And that's sort of, yeah, why are we putting these compilations together? And I think one of the things that really, the purpose of this is that all of these types of data are on very different, they're not easily integratable. And I think that's the challenge. And as soon as we start to line some of these up, we'll be able to get at some of these really important questions. Any other thoughts from anybody else on the ideas that were floated around then?
I just had one quick comment, and I don't know if this has already been talked about earlier before I hopped on about 20 minutes ago, but just to Will's point, I think one thing that really would be very productive to look at between regions, both within but also between regions, would be especially for on the archaeological side, just in terms of thinking about population dynamics in deep time through Africa and the importance of those connections for emerging ideas about the evolution of our species, for instance, and potentially previous ones. Would be looking at things like biogeographical processes and biogeographical corridors, barriers, refugia. I think this would be one of the most interesting outputs for people interested in humans that we might be able to get out of the ecological side, would be to just look at what was looking good, what was not looking good, were there long-term barriers or long-term corridors that we can actually see with terrestrial, highly resolved local data of sufficient density. I think that would be just fundamental and really an attractive possibility for this project on the archaeology side that we would stand to gain. It's a very selfish comment, but there we go.
No, I think that resonates very strongly with what we're about to say in the next little bit, and I agree that, yeah, putting these things together and using that framework to think about barriers and connectivity and landscapes and climate stuff is really something where we can make some big steps forward, I hope, with getting this blend of people that we have in this physical and virtual rooms. Okay, any other questions on the North American side of things? No, in which case we'll switch over to what we were talking about in the EU hub as we've become. I've been reincorporated into the European Union as a Brit. That's great.
Is this working?
I think so. Can I people see Stephanie's screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, it's fine because it's on this computer here as well.
Yeah.
So we can check it there. So if you go to the presentation.
Okay.
I think that works. Does that work?
Like it switched to this weird presentation.
Oh, that's weird. It's like it's okay on a big screen and it's kind of little on here. Anyway.
Okay, whatever works, kind of.
People can see this. Okay, so we, Stephanie and I are obviously together, but we're not in some sort of luxurious boardroom. We are in the capital of the Prussian Empire, in Potsdam, in a slightly wet and rainy Germany. And who are we? And everyone else has been joining us remotely, and I think a lot of people are available online. So, but I think in terms of the introductions, I will just spin around and introduce people and their expertise. And then if people want to jump in and add stuff, that's great. And if not, we can then move onwards. I'm Will Gosling, for people who don't know me. I'm a paleoecologist. My Africa work has been mainly in West Africa. I'm an expert in palynology. Martin Trouth seems to have an ever-growing multi-decadal experience of working in Africa. It went from 20 years to 30 years in the space of a few minutes, according to Stephanie this morning.
I'm sorry, I got confused.
And has been working on time series analysis and climate dynamics and understanding African climate systems. He has a huge wealth of experience and computational knowledge and expertise to add to understanding those paleoclimate data sets. We have Eleanor Skerry, who is currently sitting in Malta in the middle of an archaeological dig. She's been working on archaeological records from Western Africa and probably all over the place. She has an extensive archaeological portfolio. We have Neil Edwards and Phil Holden, who I know well from my time when I used to work back at the Open University in the UK. They had offices near me. They are paleoclimate modelers working with intermediate complexity models, and we've been talking with them about how do we integrate model outputs, model projections of past climate and potentially past vegetation with real empirical climate data. What do our proxies mean? How do they link up? But also thinking about the climate mechanisms and how can the models get us to understanding better about how those climate systems are functioning and what is driving change across the African continent. Matthias Winnepand, which I'm probably pronouncing horribly, apologies for that, I have met this morning. He is going to be a postdoc on a new project that is starting looking at the late presumptive record in West Africa, and he's going to be tightening up our understanding of the chronologies. I'm not entirely sure what his background is, but Matthias, do you want to say just quickly?
Well, yeah, I have a lot of geochemistry background, but also worked with geophysics. So yeah, I think that's very a good description of my work, that I've done so far. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So he'll be based in Hanover from early next year. And we have Stephanie, who is, what are you? A paleoclimate person, really working mainly on marine records. Yeah. And she likes abusing diatoms and
forearms. I don't do diatoms.
Forearms, dissolving forearms and extracting their chemicals. Yes. But yes, she's been working on paleoclimate and thinking about climate mechanisms over Africa, and was obviously the lead on the recent paper, which is where Stephanie and I met when I gate crashed a the Tuba Here project meeting, which I had nothing to do with, and I came across, and we sat and drank coffee and came up with the start of those ideas for that paper. Well, you'd already got the ideas, but I gate crashed that as well. So those are the people that are involved. And I'm going to hand over to Stephanie now, who is going to tell you a bit more about what that little group of people. Does anybody want to add anything about themselves? Does anyone feel horribly misrepresented? No, that's good. I've not offended anybody, or I've offended them so much.
Good summary.
Cheers, Neil. Okay, Stephanie.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to apologize to Neil. I misspelled your name. I'm terribly sorry. Basically what we did from a European hub point of view is our baseline was the PNAS paper that came out this year, where half the people that met today were actually co-author on. So, and this is basically where our starting line was, that we kind of like thought about African climate for the entire continent rather than concentrating on one single record or one single site, and then trying to do big picture approach by seeing what could be an like overarching process that shapes African climate on timescales of hundreds of thousands of years. So one of the things that today or this morning session was about from the European hub point of view is can the stuff we see from the climate proxies actually also be modeled? How does climate proxy records relate to the model output? This is something we've been thinking about for the entirety of pretty much last year already, that we are trying to somehow find a way to compare this. And this is also echoing with some of the stuff from the other hubs that spoke before. So, but we basically try to do is the idea from the PNAS paper, assuming that this is worker circulation changes, then it should be everywhere in the tropics, meaning even outside of Africa, you should be able to find it. So one of the things we've done is we actually compiled data sets for the last 500,000 years from all over the tropics, and then see if we can see these switches we proposed, and then use a climate model output from Neil and Phil to see if we can model this. One of the adjustments we made for the model is that most climate models are very often driven by a set of parameters like CO2 or ice sheets, and also insolation. But the process we proposed in the PNAS was basically, it's insolation driven, particularly in the tropics. So what we asked Neil and Phil to do is try to drive the model just with insolation, and then compare the precipitation changes that come out with our result from the proxy record, which adds up fairly nicely. So the changes we propose in the paper are something we can actually pick up from the model. So one of the first things we like to bring to the table is these kind of output data from the models and from our worldwide climate proxy record compilation to highlight the fact that this process seems to be an intrinsic feature of tropical climate change across at least the last 500,000 years on timescales of hundreds of thousands of years. So, and out of this baseline, we also thought about when you have these wet-dry changes, you basically move into vegetation changes, and that gets you to barriers. And why the PNAS idea is that it works on timescales of hundreds of thousands of years. The two things I do not know, and that none of us really has yet the chance to look at, is first off, how does this process work on longer timescales, and how does this process work on shorter timescales? This, for instance, is something that's echoing the stuff from the South African hub. Theoretically, for instance, South Africa is super sensitive to changes stemming from the ENSA system today. It's like one of these areas that are most affected in Africa. So I would expect it to be like hit by this change over timescales. However, we don't know on timescales, let's say, of 20,000 years, if you can actually see it in the data. We don't know this for any of the records. And the other thing is, the further you go back in time, the worker circulation, the way we define it today, is not actually old. It's maybe 1 million years, maybe 1.5 million at best. So the moment you step further back in time, you end up with a tropical climate system that's not necessarily comparable to today. So all the assumptions that we made in the PNS paper might not hold, as similar as that. So one of the things we really wanted to do is, within the framework of this project, is test the idea in the PNS paper on different timescales, different regions, and see how well this holds up, and whether or not this can explain stuff, or whether or not a different kind of thinking is required. So one thing we want to particularly concentrate on is going back to the time frame of 1 million years, so from today to 1 million years, and then include, for instance, the new boson view record that we're trying to produce, as well as compile data from also outside of Africa and the Eurasian realm, to answer a question like where our common ancestors might have been located, not so much which one it is, but rather what the conditions were in terms of spatial barriers within Africa, but also outside of Africa, that might be able to answer some of these questions that stem from the archaeological point of view. So these major contributions is something we want to think about, and we want to like work towards. And that is also echoing stuff that was already kind of like spoken to in the other hubs. Then we have a whole range of side projects that already are going on. First and foremost is the Lake Boson view record. For those of you who might not as familiar with this is a lake located in Ghana. And that actually goes back to 1 million years. Also, only the upper, what, 400?
Half a million.
Yeah, 500,000 years, there is a pollen record available, but the lower 500,000 years hasn't been looked at yet. So Matthias' project will basically to go into this lake, get high resolution borehole geophysical data and whatever else we can gather, and get a really consistent wet-dry index out of this record, and so basically provide a benchmark record for tropical Western African climate. So we have something on that side of Africa that then can be compared to, let's say, Malawi or Magadi, which are roughly 1 million years in age as well. Another side project that's already going on is looking, basically testing the Paleoenso idea on shorter timescales. Is a project that's located in Amsterdam with Will. It's a student looking into reconstructing Pan-African climate variability based on pollen data for the last, let's say, 20,000 years or 15,000 years. And we're trying to link the changes from the pollen, the east-west changes that we assume are in there based on our ENSO mechanism, and see if we can link this to changes in population, diversity, this kind of stuff.
So this is, yeah, just to add into that, that's tying, I mean, Sarah was talking about the neotoma and these data uploads. So Joost, who's the student working on that, has been working with Sarah to get data uploads and to get information into neotoma that help us do this. And I think this is sort of where this idea of, as we get these greater data densities, what can we do to understand this system functioning?
There's a comment from Manu. Can't you see me switching through the slides, or did the slides not switch?
Not switching.
I'm still on the first slide, yeah.
Okay, then let me, because of what, can you see the second slide now?
Yes.
All right, I'm gonna leave it like this because I don't know what's going on. So we just, I just started with a side project, so like with Zoom3 and then the African humid Holocene thingy versus Paleoenso. Then there's a side project going on that's comparison between vegetation data and vegetation model output. So we're really trying to somehow a little bit put a focus on comparison proxy data against model output, whether or not it's climate or vegetation. We really, like from our hub perspective, really trying to connect these dots.
And that's kind of more of that data is extractable from the models that Neil and Phil have developed. That requires more work, more effort to do that. But I think ultimately when we get these sort of greater vegetation densities, there is a real potential to do some comparisons between what's the degrees of openness, degrees of carbon storage in the model? How can we do those sorts of comparisons? So that's a bit more, aspirational is probably the way to put it, but I think those ideas are out there.
Yes. Another thing is that comes from a project that Martin is planning, is looking at Pan-African climate variability. It's to some extent is also based on the idea to combining as much as marine as well as terrestrial records, because there are a lot more terrestrial marine records out there than terrestrial records, and combining these for different time slices across the Pleistocene, basically, and then look through spectral analysis, look at climate variability at tipping points within the climate. And that again echoes stuff from, I think, particularly the American hub that were asking about what kind of records are available. From a marine point of view, there is like a ton of records that was produced in the 80s and 90s that require some revisiting, but there's a huge lot of records available offshore mostly that could potentially be used to put into a more detailed climatic framework of African climate change over various of timescales. And the last side project that we are thinking of here in the European hub was ancient DNA. Again, that goes to some of the stuff that was already said. It's with a question mark because none of us is an expert in this, and none of us really has an expertise in this. So we kind of like feeling out in a way what is the potential of including this into the work we're planning without having the complete and utter overview at the moment what to do with this. So this is still something we want to do. Also, we're not entirely sure how to do this and how to add this, but it's something at the periphery of this hub that we would be really interested in looking into, and that might also provide connections to other hubs.
I mean, I think it's a skill set that which was why I was interested to hear as we went around the room that people were talking about this in the Eastern Africa group. And so maybe the expertise there and we're just not aware of it. But I think there was Asafa had a comment on the chat regarding like thinking about the next steps and pages, working groups and those sort of things. And I think it is absolutely, we have a small amount of money to get people together and to start to think about things. But I think for me, one of the exciting things about this group is to how do we use it to springboard the next things. And so absolutely, please keep in mind like ideas. If you see, oh, this is a direction I think we could go on, or this is an opportunity where we could get funding for a PhD or a postdoc or something, either at a local level or at a bigger level, like how do we do that? And I think that's important to get this, not just to think about this project as a lone thing, but as a springboard, hopefully, for a bunch of different stuff that different people will lead in different parts of the world. And I think if we can all help each other, then that will be good. So yeah, please. Yeah, do think about these things.
Basically echoing what Will just said, that we really like, this is a baseline, it's our first meeting, and we're really looking for anyone who's interested, who wants to work in this climate vegetation human nexus, that can see themselves contributing to this overall goal of this project, that we are happy to invite them. This is just where we had to start somewhere. This also goes to our next point that we were thinking about, how to set up the next meeting, because we're supposed to have a next meeting maybe in spring next year. And it's a question of like on the details, but mostly one of the things that when we were discussing was we have a South African hub, we have an East African hub. So we have a huge concentration on South African and East Africa. One thing we do not necessarily have as fully defined is West Africa. So one of the things we were thinking about was if we should set up or could set up something with the West Africa. Switch off the echo.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you, Stephen.
So that's something like that we want to widen the participation, not just on our hub, but in general. And that maybe, depending on also some feedback from the other hubs, if it would be interesting for a lot of people to look into a specific West African hub, or is it something we can include into the other hubs? Lastly, in terms of outputs, there are 2 papers we were thinking that are fairly well developed already. So the one is a climate data versus climate model output, because we already have the model output and the overall idea. So that's something that we're gonna start like writing together beginning next year. So this is one thing we already have fairly well developed, and that we then can kind of like, in terms of a seminar talk, already share, so get other people thinking about it. The other paper we were thinking about is the exercise in trying to see if the ENSO proxy or the ENSO mechanism works on shorter timescales. In this case, basically for the Holocene timescale, see if this works, if we can find this, or if we like find some troubling aspects or some sensitivities to other processes that we might also take into consideration for longer periods of time. So these 2 things we were thinking that we could write up fairly easily within a not so far future. And this would also relate to at least one of the seminar talks that we like to prepare. And the second seminar talk that we were thinking about would be from Eleanor Scarry, and pretty much about distribution of hominid populations, not so much just in Africa, but also out of Africa. So going back to the question of where our common ancestors might have come from, and how we can translate climatic change that's in Africa also outside of Africa to a region where our ancestors might have been located at the time. So I think I didn't forget anything. This is pretty much it.
Yeah, and I think that's good. I think that the idea of thinking about the distributions is to like explicitly loop back to that idea about the climate and vegetation barriers. So like to give everyone in this group a sort of idea, and then when we're working up the climate data, or we're working up the vegetation data, we can start to think about like what are the relationships between those populations and the what's going on in the landscape that they're experiencing. And so that would be really a kind of setting the scene sort of presentation, which I think would be nice.
All right, because that's basically with the hubs. I don't know, do we want to make a short coffee break, because it's an hour and a half now into this?
Yeah,
before we start into the general discussion.
Yeah, we just kind of ran through that. That seemed really quick to me, but if you tell me an hour and a half has passed, then that means I've been having fun. And I was pleased that Sarah also said she was having fun at 7 o'clock in the morning. So hopefully she's okay. Yeah, I suggest, are there any comments on what Stephanie and I have just said? Does anyone want to add anything or add any comments?
Okay, Lynn asked about the North African hubs. That's something we should think about, definitely. It's like maybe something to combine with the West Africans or something.
Yeah, it's about identifying those individual. Part of the reason for these 4 hubs is because we knew individuals who were prepared to take a lead. So if we have names and ideas of people who are based in those regions who can get people together and to do that, then that would be really, really awesome. And I think, yeah, as I said earlier, the remit from Inquire is to build the community. And so if we can do that in this way, it will be great. We could also put out an open call asking for people to lead that as well, because there's probably people out there that we don't know within this network. But I think that's also important, because I think, Manu, do you have access to like all those Inquire distribution email lists? Is that correct?
I have access to the Parcom mailing list.
Yeah. So,
arguably to the other ones as well, but not that I'm allowed to use them. But Lynn can.
But Lynn can. Lynn's yeah. So we should use that network as well to expand things when appropriate.
Okay.
Yeah, I can definitely distribute to the whole of Inquire, all the commissions, send out a notice.
Okay.
Okay.
Want to go for a break?
Yeah, I suggest we take like a 15-minute break. What's the time now? It's like...
It's 2:30.
2:30. Okay. Okay, like a 15-minute break sound good to people?
Yeah, that sounds
okay,
good.
So let's come back at 2:45.
Because when we have to change Zoom links again.
Well, we could just stay here.
Yeah, but I don't know, like with the people that come in, we have to tell them that we...
That's true. Okay, so let's, yeah, we're slightly off schedule somehow.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. Like if maybe we can just take a 10-minute break.
Okay, let's meet back here at 2:45. That's probably easiest for people. Okay.